Good morning, everyone, and thank you for registering or attending our electric vehicle integration webinar recently co-hosted by the Race for 2030 and iMove CRCs. My name is Oliver Hill. I'm a research program manager at the Race for 2030 CRC with a focus on networks research and electric vehicle integration. And you will shortly be hearing from our expert panel from RMIT, Curtin, UTS, and C4Net as they have a discussion on the topic of electric vehicle integration and answer some of the questions that we had from our attendees on the day. Accompanying this recording is also a Q&A document, which our panelists have provided some responses to. And if you are interested in engaging on this topic further, you may get in contact with us at Race or iMove, or contact myself directly at oliver.hill@racefor2030.com.au. I hope you enjoy the discussion. It is record at least this discussion piece. So we will have a nice, vibrant discussion at least to share with those who are unable to make it this morning. So, question which I'm going to selfishly steal first before going to questions amongst the panel. So we've heard a lot of different interesting perspectives from all of our panelists here today, and I'm quite interested to, I guess, step back at this, look at it at a high level for a second, and maybe just get maybe a 30-second response from everyone on this potential scenario. We're thinking about the year 2030 now. So there's, multiple more EVs on the road. We're potentially looking at a doubling or a tripling every 5 years out to 2030. So significantly more cars on the road and more utilization of charging on the road than there is today. How do you think that would change how you got around in the last week? And I'm interested just to hear a little response from all of our speakers here today. So I'll start with you, Marty.
Yeah, thanks, Ollie. So I think we have to do it carefully. If mass EV adoption makes the NSPs to invest in networks and upgrade the network, that will have some cost. And if they pass the cost on to customers, this might make the network cost more expensive to all and might make the energy less affordable. So we have to do a little bit more on EV grid integration. So we have to use smart charging, we have to use smart chargers, we have to use this kind of V2G to make maximum benefit out of our assets, to minimize the investment costs in order to upgrade the network and to keep the affordability high. Otherwise, we might not reach to the outcome. Having more EVs might make the energy prices higher for vulnerables, and this is not what we want to achieve.
Thanks, Martin. Interesting perspective. Peter, your take on the future.
Yeah. Well, it's 2030 and the grid is fully renewable in the Swiss. It has been for 3 years, and the electric vehicles are doing V2G as part of the community battery system that is helping to create that fully renewable grid. And the trackless trams are running down 5 different corridors in Perth to demonstrate that you can get people out of cars as well. And there's even a lot more cycle paths, so when Stuart comes back to Perth, he can see it.
Thanks, Peter. I'm looking forward to that future. Stuart, will you still be on your bike?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll still be on the bike in 2030. And but interestingly, the conversation I had last night with a few neighbours in a 120-unit complex that I live in would be a very different conversation. We were talking about how we can get infrastructure for EV charging, and it's a microcosm of the grid because we're worried about overload on distribution boards. That would have been solved because the smarts to solve that are already available right now, and the charging methods and the metering, monitoring and allocation through sharing are already available, but we need to actually get some case studies on the ground to test those and make people feel comfortable with them.
Yes, excellent. And finally, hear from you, Ruchika. Oh, sorry, you're on mute, Ruchika.
Sorry, I think it's a combination of what's been said. If I go out maybe another 10 years, I'd love to see more integration of sort of 15-minute communities, right? Everything's more is within walking distance. You've got, wider pedestrian and cycling ways that don't have to share the roads with larger vehicles in any kind of unsafe way. I think just building on Madi's point for a moment, though, I think it's really important that we recognize that this cost of the transition in some way, shape, or form is going to be borne by the consumer, right? Whether that is passed through from a network connection charge or from a policy initiative that's then tax funded, like there's no way around the consumer paying for this transition. What Madi mentioned, though, is exactly what I think we really need to focus on, is how do we make that transition as efficient as possible, and how do we understand how we can create, and again, we use this term value a lot, and what does value mean for the consumer? Because in some cases, what we're going through right now is a socio-technological transformation, right? And you can't decouple the two. It's a social transformation in terms of what we're asking consumers to do and leaning into the conversation or leaning into participation in the market. Exactly as Stuart mentioned, he's using his car as a battery, and he's considering his car as an asset within his house. That's a massive shift for people outside of the industry to try to conceptualize and get engagement with, right? How do you build that engagement with consumers? Because that's 80% of who we're talking about. You've got the 10%, Stuart's got an EV, I've got an EV, that are kind of the fast, early adopters. And then you've got, probably, unfortunately, more than 10%, but for illustrative purposes, there's a group of people that are vulnerable in one way, shape, or form, whether that's energy security or bushfire risk or reliability or, whatever the case may be. But the majority of people don't have the capacity or the interest to engage in the energy conversation in the way that some of our technologies and markets are actually asking them to do. And I think what would be great is a future where we find a way to provide consumer agency for those who want to lean into it, and transparency, without requiring consumers to be actively involved in the transition, because I think that's a really big ask of people.
Thanks, Richie. Yeah, that's certainly a key point in the research we hope to do in the future with race. Consumers are really at the heart of everything we do in the CRCs. So, look out for them across all levels of interaction with EVs and all levels of socioeconomic. So I've got a couple of questions from the Q&A here. So initial one I've got for Madi, actually. So got a question just saying, around approaching industrial electricity users that have the potential to use large vehicle pools to test infrastructure integration. So I guess at the heart of the question is, in the research which you're doing currently, Madi, and feel free to ask this as well, others afterwards, have we approached fleet management companies that have access to those large fleets of electric vehicles and would be interested in electrifying rapidly through corporate EV strategies? So what kind of user groups, I guess, are we speaking to there with large amounts of fleets in our research?
Yeah, I think this is what Stuart and Peter are going to do in SEVI project. So that is core to the second part of the project, fleet managers. We know that more than 45% of the vehicle purchase in Australia are for corporate use and fleets, and they can be electrified pretty easily or earlier than the other users. And they might be easier to manage and to get on board for V2G and the connection to the grid. So the answer is yes, they are critical, and they are going to be studied in SEVI project.
Thanks, Sonny. Peter, Stuart, do you want to comment on that at all as to how we're approaching those larger fleet owners in research projects?
Yeah, totally agree with Madi. We will be hoping to look at that. The choice of which case studies and whether they're industrial electricity users that this person is asking about is to be determined yet, because obviously we have to have the cooperation of case study participants. So, but I would hope that they might include industrial electricity users for the reason that this person asks.
Yeah, look, I think one of the big fleet owners is buses, and these are ideal new power sites for the bus depots. I was on the ACT project that was electrifying their buses, and they chose the site for the new bus depot that would fit the grid. They have tariffs now that are going to be enabling them to be providing a very good way of achieving funds through the grid integration, and that process is happening very quickly because they got out in front and said this should be happening, and it's all now proceeding. So I think everyone needs to learn how to do fleets and where they're and how they fit into the grid, but keep an eye on the buses. They're a very important part.
Thanks, Peter. I'll move along to another question, just in the interest of time. I've got a question here on how we would consider grid connections to smooth out charging and better utilise excess solar. I might make reference to one of the objectives of the government's National Electric Vehicle Study here, and that establishing those resources, systems and infrastructure to enable EV uptake and utilisation is a key objective here. And I think one of the initiatives proposed there is mapping out how we can better place charging infrastructure. So I guess open question, whoever would like to take it first, how do we best consider where those grid connections can be placed along vehicle routes to optimize charging and excess solar as well?
I might jump in really quickly on that one. I think it's a great question, and I think this just demonstrates a little bit of the requirement for us to have that dialogue with transportation on a state-by-state basis as well, because each state, depending on what type of vehicle you're talking about, right? So in Victoria, buses are funded by the government, but effectively privately owned and operated. And those owner-operators or operators also are responsible for the charging infrastructure and or the depots. So it's a question of incentivizing those parts of the supply chain or the value chain associated with public transportation to then put depots or charging infrastructure, pay for that charging infrastructure along the route. They would need to collaborate with DNSPs to understand where the network support would be required. And that's a massive gap in understanding that we would need to bridge in terms of saying, okay, your job is actually efficiently running a bus, operating a bus, getting people from point A to point B and making sure that a route is met. And now we're asking you to engage with the DNSP. So that's the gap is effectively the answer in some cases. So while I think to people in the industry, it sort of makes sense that, yeah, absolutely. Why wouldn't you just identify areas where there might be excess solar? We need a solar soak, put a bus depot there. The question is, again, the business model associated with doing that, the cost associated with doing that, and then how that cost is smeared over the different participants in that particular scheme. And that's where the challenge lies.
Thanks, Ruchika. Does anyone else want to comment on that one as well?
Oh, just to say that there are some resources that have been developed. The network opportunity mapping, a project that we've been involved with the Energy Networks Australia on, provides a basis for saying geographically, spatially, where could that happen. But Ruchika is absolutely right that when you're bringing two sectors together, the transport and the electricity, it makes for additional complexity, but also some potential opportunities.
Yeah, and it's all about the business case, and that's certainly what we will be doing in our research. But there's a lot of business cases already happening that we can follow through and say, what are particularly the cost we know a lot about, but the benefits are now flowing very rapidly. And I think surprising how quick it is. My predictions might have been sounded or thought to be a bit crazy by 2030, but it's happening so quickly that I think it'll be hard for us to keep up in our research, but we hope to be out there in front. I think the market is happening much quicker than most of us are seeing.
Thanks, Peter. We've got a lot of questions, unfortunately not a huge amount of time, so I'm going to, Ruchika, it looks like you've jumped on this question on the Q&A there, so we'll focus on this one on community engagement. So got a question on how local community engagement is the real challenge we face to implement a decarbonised future. How do we make this happen? Got a raised hand there from John Thompson. So I'm assuming that might mean they want to say something live. Ruchika, I'll let you give a quick response and then we'll see if we can get a comment from the crowd as well.
Yeah, thanks. It's a huge challenge, John. And for anyone, I'll try to get to your questions like after this as well. I'm happy to stay on and type out responses. But John, it's a great question, and it's a massive challenge. And I think it's fundamentally, it just fundamentally requires a more investment in resources around stakeholder engagement and a longer term perspective from incumbents in the sector around how to engage with consumers. I don't think that this industry does it well at all, and it's a real area of opportunity for us. It means you need to get involved in the community. You need to invest in resources to understand what the drivers and the needs of each community are, where they sit on the spectrum of decarbonization versus some of the other challenges that were raised by other folks on this panel in terms of affordability, reliability. Again, maybe bushfire risk is a major issue for that community. Understanding where they sit on the spectrum of electricity needs in the transition, but then also how that fits in, because it's not just an electricity problem when you talk about community energy and engagement. That tends to get combined with a whole bunch of other socioeconomic and demographic challenges. So it's very hard to unpack and unpick, but it's something that we have to do. So I would just recommend, fighting the good fight and articulating that there needs to be more resource investment and understanding community needs. Communities are going to have different needs. We've got a postage stamp system right now, which I don't think is actually going to meet the needs for the future. I think we're going to end up seeing a lot of regionalized and localized solutions and or markets, and then that gets managed by some kind of DSO moving forward.
Can I just add, I think it's a far more positive, again, story. I know Ruchika's job as a researcher is to try and find the problems and, get to work on them. But we can't just keep saying that they're problems and they're going to require a lot of money. Just quickly to tell you, we have in WA been forced, the government has been forced into recognising that the major changes that are going to be needed into the future in terms of targets and so on are going to have to be addressed, because some days 80 to 90% of the grid is from our PVs on our roofs, because we put them all in. And there are all kinds of projects now happening, and the Witchcliffe one's a classic example, totally bottom-up projects happening all over the place. And I think we need to go and talk to them and see what we can learn from them. But they are disrupting the grid systems, the transport systems, the fleet systems, and making them, drawing them into the future very rapidly. And I think we can get stuck by just looking at what we see that the bottom end of the market rather than the top end are doing right now.
Thanks, Peter. We've gone a bit past time already. I'm hopeful that we can get another maybe minute out of this, because there's one question that I just want to put to everyone before the end. Hopefully it helps out with a lot of our participants online as well. For those listening, we're planning to take these questions afterwards, have a bit of a working doc that we will hopefully be able to send out to those who registered today as well. So we'll look to try and get to your questions offline too. But in way of kind of a final 30 seconds from each of the panelists today, and thank you all for presenting. There's a lot of people interested out there on, what are the best sources of knowledge and information in terms of, what are the policies which are happening in Australia? What kind of incentives can I get in Australia in terms of EV uptake or in terms of infrastructure and integration? If you've got a favorite source or, example online, place where you go to get this information that you think would be really useful to share with everyone else, I think everyone on the call today could really learn a lot from going and looking at these resources. So Stuart, I might start with you. Have you got a favorite place you go to get this sort of information?
Well, I think one of them's the one that Ruchika said, which is the EV Data Warehouse. That probably will be a useful and growing source. There's one from the UK. I don't have it on the tip of my tongue, but I can certainly put it in the materials afterwards. The major trial that was done in the UK had some really useful stuff on V2G, but it's quite disaggregated. I think there's a need for a much more centralised, coordinated resource.
Very true. Marty, what about you?
Yeah, the same with SCR. There is one very good one with the UK network that we have the data. It's huge data. It's very, very useful data. And also C4Net's EV Data Hub. These are just for the data, but there are many other information as well. Arena had some project related to that, and possibly knowledge sharing data of Arena could be useful. So they have already published reports, and Race has also published a couple of reports related to EVs. They're also a very good source of information that can be used.
Very true. Ruchika, other good sources of information in addition to the C4Net?
I mean, yeah, I didn't even pay Stuart to say that, so that's amazing. No, I think we're trying to build that hub, right, in collaboration with the Living Lab through RMIT. So it's got about 75 sources listed there to other databases. So it's fairly comprehensive, but at the same time, we are always adding to it. So if others know of sources that they would like us to include there, if you just flick them our way, then we'll do the due diligence to get them up on the website and make sure that they're of reasonable quality. Otherwise, I think I would go to RMIT's Living Lab, and as they start to publish more and more from that outcome, that would be of tremendous interest. Just really quickly, I will say for the EV data that we're getting, there was a question online about where that's sourced from. This is in collaboration with SolarVic as part of their EV rebates. So it's part of the criteria for getting the rebate. You agreed to have your data anonymized and aggregated across all of the EV participants. So we can't give you the location of the load profile, like specifically in terms of street or even postcode. I think it's just slightly too little at that point, but broadly we can give you possibly by distribution area and then across Victoria what those EV load profiles look like. It's really rich data, actually. So please feel free to reach out after this call if you're interested.
Thanks, Ruchika. And Peter, your go-to sources for information in this space?
I'm just going to say, go to the Witchcliff Eco Village website, and you'll see lots of inspiring stories about what's happening down there. And to let you know that on the 1st of October, the other race project, Net Zero Precincts, which includes electric vehicles, but integrates them into the whole story of how a precinct operates. And that's 13 different case studies across Australia. We have purchased the site for Net Zero Precinct, and that will have all kinds of stories and information available on a regular basis. Josh Burns very keen to make that bottom-up approach very clearly available across Australia. So we look forward to that site coming online on October the 1st.
Thanks, Peter. Always nice to end on a positive note there. So I've got a bit over time. Thank you for everyone who stuck with us today. It was a fantastic presentation. We've got lots of lovely questions. So we will be looking to try and get through these as a bit of a Q&A. I'll work with the panelists and we'll see what answers we can put against these questions and send them around as a bit of an open resource for people. And we'll also get the last 15-minute, 20-minute discussion that we've had as well online as well and share that with everyone who couldn't attend today too. So thank you for coming along to our webinar today on EV integration, co-hosted by Process 2030 and iMove CRC. Thank you to our panelists, Peter, Stuart, Marty, and Ruchika, and hope everyone has a good afternoon. Thanks.
Thank you.